Aries is a fire sign, and it's in the cardinal modality. So that means that Aries is the first sign of the zodiac. It's initiative. It's at a beginning phase. It's not stable. It's not mutable. This is a sign that's focused on new beginnings, new life. Aries is an infantile sign. It's a newborn baby. That's how you can think of it. Aries is archetyped by a ram, and in some cases, since Aries is the first sign of the zodiac, it's coming into this world with no preconceived notions. So on a more negative end, Aries can sometimes be archetyped as like a sheep, like blind sheeps who don't know what they're doing. The planetary rulerships of Aries is that it's at home in Mars, it's exalted by the Sun and Pluto, it's falling in Venus, and it's debilitated in Saturn. So with Aries being at home in Mars, it ties in with how Aries is an initiative sign. Aries is a warrior sign. It's always fighting for its own survival. It's always primarily focused on itself. Like a baby, like when a baby is born, it's not focused on like everybody else. It's focused on itself and how this world is treating it and who is helping it survive and who's trying to kill it. With Aries being exalted by the Sun, again, it speaks to the naturally selfish nature of Aries. And in a minute, I'm going to get into a way deeper description of why it's exalted in Pluto, so I'm not going to go into that right now. But Aries is falling in Venus, and this is because Venus is about relationships. It's actually a sign that's focused around other people, people that you value, things that you value. It's falling in Venus because, again, Aries is focused on itself. It's a selfish sign, and I'm going to get into more of that in a minute as well. And Aries is debilitated in Saturn, meaning when Saturn enters Aries, it's in its worst position. It is like its hands are tied. It doesn't like being there. Really, it's hard for it to survive when Saturn is in Aries, because Saturn is a planet of authority figures, people who are wiser and more mature than you. It's also a planet of restriction, like imprisonment, bondage, being held back, not being able to be who you are because there's limits placed around you. So when Saturn is in Aries, Aries energy is poisoned. It atrophies. It can't just burst out and be bright and all powerful like it's supposed to be, because remember, it's exalted by the Sun. Aries comes from the first house, and the first house represents you, the immediate circumstances that are always part of your life, your identity, the way that you look, your physical body. Like the second house rules over how you feel about your body, like your self-esteem, how you feel about yourself, your resources. The first house is your actual self. The color associated with Aries is red, and this is because I'm going to get into in a minute why it's associated with your blood, but Aries is a sign that rules over blood, so the color associated with it is red. So the anatomical rulership of Aries is the head, the face, the arteries, especially the major arteries, the blood, and blood pressure. And usually you can tell what someone's blood pressure is like and the health of their blood and their arteries through their face, because it will be reflected in the color of their face. The tarot cards associated with Aries is the Fool and the Emperor. So you can Google these cards, or you can look at your own deck if you have one. The Fool is a man who is dressed in like a jester costume, like he doesn't care how he looks, and he's kind of like he's on an adventure. He has a, I don't know what they're called, like a sack on his back, he's about to leave home and go see where the wind takes him. And the Fool's eyes are closed. He doesn't know that he's about to walk right off of a cliff. So when I translate this into like what the meaning of the card is, the Fool doesn't answer to anyone. He isn't paying attention to anyone. He's barely even paying attention to himself. He exists. He hasn't gone on his adventure yet. He doesn't know anything. He's just like, he doesn't know what to expect. There's no preconceived notions. There's a whole energy that goes along with the Fool card. Like nothing has manifested yet, and nothing has ended yet. It's just like, he's just in the moment. The Fool isn't part of any group. They have no pre-made life path. They're just doing whatever they want. They're just going with wherever their passion takes them, even though they're about to walk right off of a cliff. And you can go even deeper into the description of the Fool. I feel like when you pull the Fool card, it's like you don't even care about listening to your own fear or your own intuition that's telling you you're about to like crash and burn. You don't care that the ground's about to give out from under you. Like, you kind of feel the energy of the Fool. And this is Aries nature at its most pure. The Emperor card is the most evolved form of Aries. And the Emperor is a king. And the king has fallen off the metaphorical cliff. He has been in war. He has killed people. He's been destroyed himself. And to reach the Emperor, now this man is on top of everything and everyone, even though if you look at his eyes in the card, he's not even paying attention to them. He's looking somewhere else. He doesn't have to focus on you or anyone because he already knows that he's like all powerful. He's not worried about anybody else because he knows that he's in the most dominant position possible. So when an Aries is not in their power, because Aries is a sign that's naturally, it's born. Aries in itself is an all-powerful sign. But when humans are born with Aries energy, they go through this lifelong process of constantly losing their power, fighting for their own survival, not being able to be in their true power. And then by default, they go through all these transformations that kill and ruin them and then therefore force them to be reborn, kind of like they're always in a state of constant infancy. Because this world doesn't let them be in their full power just off the bat. So when an Aries is not in their power, and usually this is because they're trying to be someone that they aren't so that they can get attention from the people around them or so that they can survive in their environment, their immediate environment. Aries start getting very weak inside and their real self starts burning them alive and fucking up their lives. And this is kind of why Saturn is debilitated in Aries, because Aries very easily gets into situations where they are being held back or restricted by somebody else. They can't like ram forward and like break through barriers. So Aries experience a lot of Saturn restriction, poisoning, and then them atrophying because they can't be who they really are. Aries is not a naturally social or attention-seeking sign. It doesn't people please. It doesn't go out of its way to win the favor of other people. That's Libra. That's the opposite sign of Aries who does that. Aries is solo. Aries is in its own power and everyone notices them and they either follow their lead or they hate them for being the one getting all the attention, because Aries is the baby. Like, if you think like if there's a new baby in your family, they're the ones getting all the care and the attention and the nurturing because they're the ones who need it the most. So when an Aries is not getting the attention and the support that they naturally deserve and that they need, they know something isn't right. So they may start going out of their way and doing all this extra shit to get attention. And they basically take on this false persona, however it manifests in their particular situation. They can start acting any kind of way. They take on whatever false identity, false persona that's going to make people focus on them again and basically meet their needs and make them remember that they exist. So if an Aries isn't willing to do this, because they can be very prideful, because remember that the sun is exalted in Aries, a lot of prideful, egotistical Aries won't do this, and they'll just sink into a depression, and then they accept being unnoticed and neglected, basically left for dead. And this does destroy them, because Aries is a baby. Like, yeah, I said earlier that Aries represents a newborn infant who can't fend for itself. So if they aren't being tended to like they're a baby, they're gonna it's gonna be like a baby screaming for its mother, and the Aries will start acting crazy to get attention again. It's not gonna care how it looks, because when your needs are on the line, you either are accepting death or you're gonna do whatever it takes to get your needs met. But if an Aries is trapped in a situation where they've become too dependent on some false identity or someone else to take care of them because they can't do things for themselves, they, on the surface, they're going to be however people need them to be. They're going to kind of start acting like a Libra. But in secret, the Aries becomes extremely chaotic. They become dark-sided and angry and violent. And they're doing this whenever they can get away with it, while still upholding that false social persona that they have. So Aries is not a naturally hateful sign, even though Aries usually does have a reputation for being combative and hateful and aggressive. You have to consider the actual energy of Aries. It's cardinal fire. So that fire energy, remember that fire does not take on any fixed form, really. It's always moving. There's always heat being generated from it. So that fire energy can take on all kinds of different forms and become all kinds of different versions of itself. And passion, which is natural to the fire element, can easily come across as hate and violence and extreme aggression to the point of being terrifying and predatory. Sagittarius is also another sign that's a natural predator, but it's different from Aries. Aries is like an inferno. It's the most high energy of all the fire signs. Leo is a fixed sign. That is where the fire kind of stabilizes and kind of is able to sustain itself in the center of the universe, and it's not going anywhere. Sagittarius is kind of like the embers of a fire that fly off, and you can't catch them. They're out of reach. Yeah, I said Aries is like an inferno. Aries also represents hell, because Pluto's exalted in Aries, and Pluto is the underworld. Even though a lot of people think that Scorpio is the sign of the underworld and Hades and all that shit, no, it's Aries. Yeah, with all I've just said about Aries having a reputation of being a very angry and violent, hateful sign, Aries is actually just passionate about its own survival. It's not about how it's coming across. At the core, that's what Aries is always focused on. So Aries who are egotistical and rude and terrible and all that shit are the ones who are not in their power, because their life situation is not letting them be in their power. And they're in fear that they're not going to survive. So an Aries who is all up in your face and trying to compete with you and take you down and prove that they're the more powerful ones, they're the ones who actually feel powerless to you. And as soon as they find a way to take their own power back, they're going to leave you alone. They don't care about you, because Aries is a solo sign. They're going to be more like the Fool. They're just like, you're non-existent. They don't care. So an Aries will feel like they're full of hatred and rage if they have to sacrifice their natural power and pretend to be like all agreeable and non-threatening, and like they're friendly, all that shit. They usually have to do this because they're in a relationship, or they're in a family system, or a professional job that requires them to have a lot of self-control. And remember, Saturn is debilitated in Aries. Aries does not naturally have self-control. It's a baby. Babies don't control shit about them. So an Aries may stick out their false identity and keep going with it until they're totally destroyed inside, and then they have to disappear and feel like they have to they will disappear from society. Aries actually regularly do this. They go MIA. And they do this because they have fell into hell and they're dead inside. And until their old false identity has died completely so that they can be reborn into their true self, and Aries will be in that kind of underworld phase of their life, going through torture, being reborn. And if an Aries is clinging to their old self in this outdated life that they were in, then their transformations will be very painful and traumatizing for them. And then their phase of being separated from the world is going to last even longer, and it's going to be more intense. And then by default, their rebirth is going to be more intense, and they're going to come out even more indomitable than they ever have been before. And yeah, so this transformative nature of Aries is why Pluto is exalted in Aries. Aries go through massive deaths and rebirths in their own identity throughout their life until they're their full selves without compromise. And honestly, I don't even say when, I could say if, because I see a lot of Aries die in violent, terrible ways. I see a lot of Aries get killed. I see Aries go through phases where they can never take their full power back on this earth because their human body is not strong enough to accommodate the rebirth, the magnitude of the rebirth that they have gone through. So a lot of Aries do die in violent, sudden ways, actually. Aries, out of all the signs, Aries is the sign that's most likely to die from head injuries and sudden death, they just drop. Because Aries does not have staying power. Remember, Saturn's debilitated in Aries. They don't have that. So if they can be in a situation where they can have their rebirth, then they come back and they shine as bright as the sun, and they don't care how people perceive them. They don't care how people feel about them, because other people are irrelevant to them. It's about them. The life path of Aries is them going from this helpless, flailing infant who always has to adapt to other people in order to survive, to the emperor who everyone sees them and everyone gravitates around them whether they like them or not. The emperor is the alpha. The emperor is indomitable, and there's nobody with more power than them, like I've said earlier. Yeah, that's the most evolved version of Aries. And the emperor I've said this before, the emperor has been destroyed before. The emperor has been beaten in wars, and that's how they become as strong as they are now, because they don't start out that way. They have to go through all these harsh experiences in order to die and then come back to life. And when it comes to social relationships, Aries has had to beat many people. They've had to cut ties with many people that they've once depended on, because those same people that once helped sustain them and give them life are the same people who are now holding them back and forcing them to be someone that they're not, and they can't grow anymore. Their identity can't transform within those relationships anymore, so the Aries has to dip. And if the other person or them is clinging, somebody has to die or go through some kind of violent accident in order for things to finally end. I made a video earlier. It's in my monologue section. I was talking about death and how we are always going through deaths, whether it's on a small magnitude, like your skin cells falling off and dying, or like it's a massive thing, like you actually physically dying. But if you cling while you're in the transformation process, you're going to get mutated and fucked up, and you may never be able to reach your full power in this human life unless you stop clinging, because you may get so fucked up due to you clinging that you are now mutated for life, and you gotta like have a whole restart, a whole new rebirth, like incarnating into a whole nother body or a whole nother dimension. If your comeback is so strong that you can't be in this earthly plane anymore. So back to Aries and relationships. This is why Venus falls in Aries. Venus is a planet of love and grace and being willing to compromise yourself to keep loved ones happy. And Aries can't do that. Aries is going to stress out their partners. They're going to be demanding from them. They're going to test their partners in every way possible. So Venus and Aries suffers in their relationships. And at some point, all their friends either leave them, their partners dump them, or they have to do it themselves, because the Aries is destroying what love is supposed to be. Like, they're trying to... Aries doesn't go into relationships thinking like, how can I serve this person and make their life better? Like, Aries goes into relationships because they need someone, because they're in some kind of rebirth or some kind of like transformation, and they need the other person to be like a servant or a caretaker for them, or even like a motivator. Depends on the situation. Aries goes into relationships looking for a second in command. Honestly, Aries is better when they're not in relationships and they're not relying on other people for love. But Aries is actually a sign that hates themselves. Aries is a sign is focused on hate more than love, because remember, it's fire. A lot of Aries, I felt into some of their minds before, like Aries only knows that they're themselves when they hate themselves. If an Aries feels like they hate somebody else, then that means that person has power over them, and they do not want to give their power away to somebody, because they know that means that inevitably it's going to destroy them. So Aries is self-hating, and they don't want you to try to take that away from them, because that's kind of how they know that their power is intact still. But yeah, even though Aries has very harsh relationships, they're humans. So they're obviously going to be in situations where they need relationships in order to survive. So they have very unhealthy relationships, especially when they're very young and very old, because this is when humans are the most dependent on other people. So when people are in relationships with Arieses, they have to expect that they're going to be seen as a supporter or even a slave at times, while the Aries is focusing on their own life and their own passions and their own transformation and come up. And this is where Mars is at home. So Aries doesn't want to go out of their way to accommodate you. They want to do everything on their own, and they want to put energy into their own passions while you're there in the background, like I've said. I say the same thing in different variations so it sinks in. So you see why Aries women are usually very masculine and get a lot of backlash from society, and Aries men are naturally very sexist. Damn, I said everything I need to say in 24 minutes. I'm done.